Right, okay. So it is just going to be me, but this is work with Kath Harvey, who's another academic within the Human Factors Research Group. We're both in the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Nottingham. I'm shortly to start a new role, actually, as a Professor of Digital Creativity at Loughborough University in the School of Design and Creative Arts, where I will be pursuing this at a much bigger scale. But I'll be talking here about my work at Nottingham over the last 3 years, where effectively I convened a module in which myself and Kath have only really interacted with our students in avatar form. So I'll talk about the sort of origins of that and the fact that we've treated this very much as a research project and have lots of great data and lots of really interesting things to talk about. Okay, so first thing, just to get into a little bit of background here, I suppose is the whole argument for why sort of metaverse, social VR, virtual worlds, I won't get into terminology, but just why this is potentially a big thing in education broadly, but for me, obviously, more specifically, higher education. There's a whole thing about the technology developing. There's a whole thing about the need for new skills, new forms of digital, new media literacy that's important. And there's a whole load of other sort of drivers here that are going on, whether or not it's climate change or the sort of post-COVID fallout in students' expectations. These are all big things that influence this potential. And it's worth always sort of bearing in mind all the sort of the positives here, why this could be such a big thing, and the sort of the learning theory models here as well, where there's a whole thing about access to learning anywhere, anytime, the fact the worlds are persistent, you can access them 24/7, all these sorts of things from anywhere in the world. There's the whole flexibility sort of argument, flexibility for the students, flexibility for the teachers, for the educators, and this is very much certainly, many different contexts, but me thinking particularly in engineering, this allows you to experience things that would be unsafe, would be inefficient, would be cost prohibitive, etc. This is a big thing in the context of avatars, which I'll talk about, is the whole thing of socialization, the ability to have something different as a result of being an avatar. And there's the whole area of contextualization as well, being in virtual worlds that suit the learning outcomes for your students. So thinking specifically about avatars, then yes, we sort of, I think we all have a good sense of what we mean by an avatar. There's some key characteristics of avatars, and I think one of the things that I'll particularly get into in here is issues of identity, because this is particularly fascinating to me and is a key aspect of the student experience. So things that are more specific to avatars in education, it's fair to say that the vast majority of research in this area has been in the gaming sort of entertainment field. You can see that so much in the literature. That research that has been done in education, particularly higher education, has found certain things about students being avatars and the benefits there. But this tends to be situations where they just come along and it's just a one-off, maybe a couple of sessions where they're avatar and that's it. And it's not really got into all the aspects of the avatar itself. And they've tended to force people into particular types of avatars. And I think this is actually really quite an important issue. So in what we have here in the work that Kath and I have done over the last 3 years is really get into what's natural here for a university student, for an avatar, what happens behaviorally when they're an avatar, so the social interactions that arise, particularly when it's an extended time period, okay, across the whole semester. And then what sort of impact does that ultimately have on the learning experience? So that brings me to Notopia, our virtual world. It's changed a bit over the last 3 years. We started with a default world, then I built this sort of fantasy castle on floated in the sky, because Nottingham's well known for its castle as a medieval city. And then I've gone bit more Star Wars this year, but based on my sort of developing, but yeah, sort of interest in Star Wars and Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything. Sometimes I feel like this is more, this is me just sort of living out my dream world, really. But anyway, so what is Notopia? So effectively, it's a fantastical virtual teaching world. I use the Mozilla Hub social VR platform. I won't get into all the arguments around different platforms, but that's it's a key one that I use. Essentially, for the first year, and it was obviously inspired initially by COVID, but it's continued on for 3 years. And that first year, I never met the students in person. The 2021 running of the module, I met them once. And this last year, just gone, the sort of autumn semester 2022, I met them twice. The rest of it is all in this virtual world. Interestingly, the course, it's a final year postgraduate option. There are no compulsory students on the course at all. I had 49 students in 2020, 95 in 2021, 122 in 2022, and I think that says quite a lot, actually. These are students who are the undergraduate students are in product design, mechanical aerospace engineering, postgraduate students from computer science, but also in engineering and human factors ergonomics. Most students do access Notopia on the desktop, but this is rising. The use of headsets is increasing all the time as I'm allowed to use the success of this module to allow purchase of headsets. So we had 24 students who used headsets all semester last year. So they were sort of expert users, if you like. What do I do? Or Kath and I do in Notopia? Well, initially the lectures were all pre-recorded, but last year we started to get into some more live lectures. Probably the most interesting thing, most engaging thing are the seminars. And this is where you realize there are so many different things you can do in seminars that are really cool in VR. Another thing that I think is actually really interesting is the equivalent of office hours, where the students can come and have a chat to me. And I would do this 2 hours on a Friday afternoon, and this was so popular. I had the 2021 run-in. I had my virtual tent where sound would not leave, and the students could come in and chat to me whilst the other students all waited outside. This year I went a bit more sort of Star Warsy, and it was sort of Harry Potterish, and it was the Cylinder of Secrets, where if you stepped into the Cylinder of Secrets, you could chat, and the others would just peer up to the glass, but they could see you, but they had no idea what we were talking about. And this was great for talking about their coursework or any concerns that they had, and was actually really popular. This is just an example of me giving a lecture. This was one of the pre-recorded ones rather than the live ones, but it will just go on for 10-15 seconds of me talking about a particular coursework.
The audio isn't coming through, Dr. Burnett. Sorry.
Okay. That'll be a setting thing, I'm afraid. But anyway, yeah. Sorry, yeah. I think that's probably the only video where the sound is particularly important. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, we get immediately into what sort of avatar has Gary got. This one I won't show the video, because they won't pick up on the sound. But you can get into different things. So this is a seminar, and I thought, well, I don't have to I could have my seminars anywhere. So I'll have my seminars in the Jedi Temple, and the students can all take their seat and pretend to be Jedis. And this was very interesting, actually, because effectively you got all students contributing, whether or not they're Batman or robots or or something that looks like them. They are taking on the persona of a wise Jedi. For the seminar, which in this one was to do with fidelity and validity for simulation. Okay, so what could students do with avatars? There were basically three options in the Mozilla Hub's setup. They could choose from a set of avatars, and there were pages and pages of the different avatars they could pick from, or they could use Ready Player Me to create a sort of more realistic humanoid avatar based initially on a photo, or Mozilla Hubs has this Hack Week avatar creator. So they're human, but they're more cartoony, and there's obviously a more sort of fun element to these avatars. What's the data that's been collected? Well, there's been related specific. There's been lots of data, but related specifically to avatars. In 2021, there was a survey that went out that was specifically about their experience of being an avatar, and 26 students filled that in. Following on from that, there was a set of one-to-one interviews that more detail. There were 9 students interviewed there. There's a whole set of videos. There's 60 hours of video data here, which I've only just started to sort of reflect on to some degree. And then there was an interesting exercise we did last autumn, where at the very beginning of the module, when they were all there in person, they were asked to design what they felt was an appropriate avatar for being a student in higher education, and almost all the students were there, so 115 of them filled it in. At the end of the module, a survey went out to ask them about what avatar did you ultimately use most during this semester, and if you did change it, why did you change it? And then there were 52 students there, so there's plenty of interesting data. So I'm going to be talking about that particularly. Oh, this just gives an example of this avatar creation thing. So so students gave a photo of themselves, they took a picture of their avatar, and they wrote a couple of sentences about why they came up with that avatar. Most students wrote 3 or 4 sentences. I just love this one. I designed my avatar in this way because I love my cat. I'm going to talk about what does that say about their concept of self here, I think. Okay, so some results. This is the 2021 survey. So 26 students filled this in. This is really about what your most used avatar. And across all the possibilities that they could have, the most common avatar was more of a sort of cartoony animal type avatar. So there's this student here as a dinosaur. There were human-based avatars that people picked, and there's a variety of different ones. And there were sort of more robot type ones. But there was but it was interesting that the most students chose not to represent themselves in human form in this experience. What was also interesting is that the students over 2/3 reported that they changed their avatar. So they're exploring things in those first few weeks, and it's quite interesting about why that happens, which I'll come into later. Now, this was drawing on some sort of previous work about avatars, but in the gaming context, and there were questions about basically why you chose the avatar that you had. And there were questions related to whether or not it was to do with it being true self, ideal self, ought self, value self, or anti-true self. And we felt there was another factor here that we brought in as a question about them wanting to be unique. Now, what was interesting here is that the things, yes, there are people who felt, strongly agreed, I wanted it to be realistic, and but the ones that stand out most is that students want their avatar to represent their likes and dislikes, their values. And also students want to be different generally. Now, there are some situations where the students would, for certain classes, would suddenly all start taking on the same avatar for a variety of reasons. But most of the time, they're keen to be unique in the world. And there was quite a few interesting points came out related to this. And in terms of some of the sort of quotes from that initial survey, then in terms of the sort of this was another Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is the Loki courtroom, TVA courtroom, and this was great for doing a sort of presentation argument type seminar where they have someone has to stand up at them and defend themselves, and the judges sort of decide whether or not they're talking rubbish or not. Anyway, in terms of the positives. There's lots of different things in here about being engaging. I could be very free. I had a lot, I had that sort of freedom to move around. I felt more willing to express myself. The anonymity thing was interested. The fact that other people praised my avatar. That I had, this was, I loved some of these phrases. Joining as an avatar gives you a veil of anonymity that's made everyone less awkward about speaking up and sharing views in classes. Sometimes students really just say this really eloquently. Now, in terms of some of the negatives that came out from this, there was things about whether or not they're being worried about whether or not they had the right kind of avatar, whether or not they would, that that would the other people may see that negatively. There was a whole distraction thing about people choosing avatars that were clearly inappropriate. So the student that comes in with a 20-foot high avatar and nobody can see anything, or they got wings that are floating like this and it's really distracting for me and for others. There were issues of friction. I think Nina mentioned about friction being a sort of an issue with getting into to actually coming up with your avatar. And then there's just the fact that you don't necessarily know, sort of, you forget what avatar you've actually got. It's more what it says about others than it says about you sometimes. Okay, so this is to do with the reflective exercise from the last run-in of the module. So this is at the beginning versus the end of semester. And I think this is really, really interesting stuff. So when they came up with their avatar at the beginning of semester, almost everyone came up either with a human realistic avatar or a human cartoon avatar. Very little else. Okay, this is what they felt, that they should do. And I'll get into reasons for that in a minute. By the end of the semester, there was a lot of change here. There was a much more diverse range of avatars, and 54% reported that they changed their avatar from the original designed one. And so there's much more of a move away from human realist to human cartoon, and bringing in animal cartoon and robots and other things, which I wasn't quite sure how to categorize them. Is Batman a human? Is it human cartoon, sort of? He's a Lego Batman though, so that's sort of different. So yeah, they got put into another category. So when it comes to then reflecting it, so when you get into what happened at the start of semester, then really the reflections there were quite simple. They tended to be into 4 different themes. There was effectively, I think it needs to look like me. Okay, this is a great quote. I wanted it to be approachable, and it needs to be professional, so I could be taken seriously in the virtual classroom. So that was one thing. But then there were others where I want it to not look like me. I've been harassed. I've been made uncomfortable because of my appearance. So I want it to be as unreflective of my real world characteristics as possible. So this is really powerful stuff, I think. Then you've got the whole thing about, and this, there were lots of points about this. This represents things that are about me as a person, my personality. I like pink, and I like Japanese anime and stuff like that. And then there's stuff that's more about the actual avatar itself. I thought it was fun. It was engaging. This yellow duck was cute. It was a bit funny, and so it's sort of commented that. So they tended to all be into those sorts of 4 themes. But when it got to the end of semester, and this is great because it shows, the sort of the learning outcomes, I suppose, particularly, they said things that related to these things again. These all came up, but there's a whole load of other stuff came up as well in the reflective exercise at the end. This anonymity came up as well. And this was interesting. I changed it to a robot because I felt that was less likely to be identified and caught not concentrating if it looked like me. This uniqueness thing came out also in here. There was a certain people started picking up on this astronaut avatar, and then lots of them had it and said, oh, I wanted to be something else, so I didn't want to be the same as everybody else, so I became Lego Batman. This I thought was fascinating as well. This whole thing about feeling like the avatar itself would change me. So it makes me feel lively. It makes the orange skins makes me feel happy. So it almost sort of changed what they felt about themselves and what they might then do in the world. That came up several times. This gets even more powerful. I designed this avatar to be the sort of what I want to be, my aspirations. She has she in the third person has her own ideas and it's cool. This, I think, is very powerful. And then there was a whole lot of other stuff. They felt that their true self avatars seemed creepy, so they picked up on the uncanny valley stuff. It felt that it suited more the context of the learning. And there were some tech issues that sort of came up as well for a few people, where their original avatar wouldn't seem to be able to get it to work anymore. So bringing this all together, there's essentially, we're into 4 themes here. There's a whole thing about design. So from a positive perspective, the being able to express yourself as an avatar in these worlds just harnesses all sorts of creativity, I think. It's a new form of creativity for people. There's much more freedom of expression there. But that could potentially, go against your learning outcomes. There's friction, there's usability, it takes time, etc. Then there's all these issues of identity. So there's this freedom of expression. It's much more equalizing in many ways. We can sort of remove issues of gender, race, etc. that may be an issue, and it can be very empowering. But there's an argument, certainly in the literature, not so much in terms of anything the students have said, but in the literature, of this as a form of escapism. It's sort of taken away from real world problems. There's a whole thing about interaction here. It's engaging, it's fun, it's motivating, it's magical, all these sorts of things of being an avatar and being able to change so easily and what you can do as an avatar. But there is certainly distraction. Some of my colleagues sort of see this as a bit trivial. Can you actually have a serious conversation with a massive owl and a panda and a couple of parrots? This for some for me it's not a problem. For others, this is sort of an issue. And then there's the whole thing around anonymity. I certainly, and you mentioned this, James, as well, have plenty of evidence of students feeling that they are way more confident in a virtual world than they would be in a real person, and they interact with people that they would never interact with in the virtual world, where people tend to sit with the people that they know, and this doesn't happen in the virtual world. But there's a flip side to this as well. I haven't really got sort of strong evidence of impersonation, but I certainly got issues where it wasn't quite clear who it was behind the avatar, and there are some sort of inappropriate behaviors where students sort of grabbing onto the tail of a fox, and whether or not you thought that's inappropriate or not, and it's an interesting one. Now there's interventions here that could maximize the advantages and minimize the disadvantages. I won't go through them all, but there's things like the avatar creation software itself and how that works, and authentication, and policy statements, etc. All of these can sort of work in this area. What time have I got? I haven't got very much time. So there's a whole thing about me as an avatar, but I'll leave that if it comes up in the questions. And just my conclusions on here is, students clearly desire a wide range of avatar experiences. I'll show this. This is all, in many ways, it's the ultimate class photo. So this is the real students on the outside, and then it's the avatar students inside. So it's like the sort of, say it's the 3D class photo basically. These were the avatars that they designed at the beginning, actually, so these would be quite different, but that's within the virtual world. So yeah, there were clearly, if you started pushing people into having true self human avatars, you would be losing a lot of the scope of what students really want. It can be very extremely positive, all the sorts of things I've talked about before. There are certain sort of disadvantages, and this framework, I feel, can help maximize these pros and minimize these disadvantages. And just where this is going, there's always new sort of functionality coming in related to avatars and the interaction possibilities. More sort of there's a whole thing about the use of the headsets and how that influenced things. I think mirrors is very interested in here. We have had mirrors this year within the virtual world, being able to see yourself and to dress up, if you like, is an interesting thing. And I think I've not formally looked at individual differences, but I do believe that's quite an important thing here. There's so much variation here between the different students and the different different cohorts. Okay, and that's me. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I believe that we have a few questions here. We have about 3 minutes, so we probably can just cover these, but plenty to talk about. That was wonderful. Dr. Hostamarty is asking about the empathy workshop and wanted to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So that was something I ran this year. I was really interested in how VR can improve empathy, and to sort of show that, because obviously the learning outcomes of this module is to understand more about VR. So the workshop itself involves students becoming wheelchair avatars, so they could select a generic wheelchair. It's a shame I haven't got a picture of that, but they basically all became the same avatar, as a wheelchair user, and then they could wander around the world and understand better the perspective of being lower in the world and having issues of reach, not being able to to get your hands on those controls, or not being able to see that particular display on an ATM or something like that. And so this was a really powerful, interesting use of avatars for promoting empathy.
Thank you. I think we have one more question and about a minute left. So Julie is going to be asking if you as the instructor know, or how you know which student is which, and if they're able to disguise their voices.
Okay, so I've no evidence of students disguising their voices. And that would be an interesting one if that started to happen. But the thing is, I don't know these students in the real world particularly. I sort of see them a little bit at the beginning, but now that the class size, if there were 40 to 50 students, then I saw them a few times in person, I would get to know them a bit. When there's 122, I really know these students. I have told the students that they must use their real name. There's no sort of Robot 2000 type names. They must have their real name, and what happens is their name is basically floating above their heads. You can see it behind me. Their name's floating above their head. So this is actually great from an educator's perspective, because I can refer to them by name. I say, that's a really good point, Phil. So, thanks for making it. So there's a lot of so that's how I know they are, and they basically have a the only students who can get into the world are the students with a particular email address, basically. So that's my authentication.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Burnett. We're now at 10 o'clock, so we'll be moving on to our next presentation. That was wonderful.
Okay.
Can't wait to read the article too.